They say when you sell your business, you make 80% of your money, and hence why it's so important to have a smooth process and get the best valuation. And today I want to tell you how I sold my Amazon business and really the lessons I learned along the way and what I wished I learned sooner. So when I sold the business, it's all about your financials. And the financial prep is pretty brutal. But it makes sense. If you're going to sell your business for a multi-seven-figure exit, the purchaser wants to have a lot of confidence that they're buying a business that's accurately reflecting the numbers, hence why it's so important to get your numbers in order. And the lesson I've learned from this is get your numbers in from the start. Something that can often start out quite small, grows into a decent sized business, and then going back in hindsight and doing the numbers is a lot more painful and costly than doing it right from the start. So the biggest hurdle in selling a business is getting clean, trustworthy numbers for the buyer who can actually believe it. It's so important that when someone's going through it, that your numbers are clean. Once they see one or two errors or they question the data, then it puts a haze in the negative light over the overall business sales. So having really clean numbers gives you much higher confidence and reduces some of the objections or negotiations about lacking clarity of your numbers. So that's where Jason and his team really came in and saved me from Intrepid Advisors. So when we sold our Amazon business, we were selling on Amazon US and Canada under an LLC. For the UK, we're using a PTY Ltd. We actually weren't in Australia because the market size is much smaller than those other markets. So that's where Intrepid and Jason helped us with the UK market because it was running through a PTY Ltd structure. And we knew actually through one of the negotiating processes, one of the buyers was really keen to unpick the difference between the two structures and how it's affecting it. So how did Jason and Intrepid really help us? So the first one, they get your books ready, investor ready, and there's clarity on margins, COGS, and ad spend. So basically when you sell business, what you want to aim for is, and this is the main difference when you sell like a sole trader, people often just want to get rid of the business, or they may sell it at maybe at best times one your profit, but often businesses like a plumbing business, people at the end of it, or a coffee shop, but sometimes they just, instead of walking away, they just want to get their money back, they just want to sell their equipment, stuff like that. E-commerce is fantastic, and especially if you've got recurring revenue. So in an e-commerce business, you should be able to get 3 to 4 times your yearly profit. If you've got recurring revenue, like a supplement, you can get up to 5 to 6 times your amount. So if your profit on a yearly basis is $1 million, a normal e-com can get 3 to 4 million as an exit. And if you're like a recurring revenues, for example, supplements, you can get 5 to 6 million. So it's really important you have clarity. When people look at your businesses, they do want to break down. They want to break down by SKU level, often how the revenue is split among products. They don't want all the money on one product, and they want to see continued growth. They're some of the few criteria that really makes a difference. And really setting the numbers up is the key baseline, which most sellers totally overlook. They say, yeah, I've got a successful business, I want to sell it. But the whole fundamental of it is your accounting and your numbers to show that. So basically, what's your margin and what's your growth? So you really need to be able to put that succinctly, and you need to use an expert as well. I'll talk about that later, what using an accountant versus an e-com accountant. But working with the guys, it was a long process, but they made it as easy as possible because that's what they do in, day out. So if you're doing 6 or 7 figures and you're looking at selling in 1 to 3 years, you need to get your numbers in order. We sold out to an aggregator. So this was back a few years ago when Amazon aggregators were massive in the market space. Basically for those guys, you needed minimum $500,000 US to be considered. And that was actually the entry into the market. And a few things, like I said before, they didn't want all the sales into one SKU. I think the minimum they wanted was like probably 25% for one SKU. And the real key one was to see their year-on-year growth. But without proper figures, you couldn't even speak to them. The big thing I learned is you must use accrual accounting. If you use cost base, people can't value business. So at an absolute minimum, you need to use accrual accounting. And my view is once you're doing, like once you're space of $100,000 a month, so you hit the 7-figure mark, at a minimum, you need to be on accrual accounting. You just can't set yourself up for success without that in place. The big thing is if you've got really clean financials, you get a much stronger valuation. But the thing I've learned more is a smoother exit. I remember way early in the process, someone reached out to me and they wanted to have a look at it. And we went on accrual. This is before we started the main negotiation. Someone just by chance reached out to me. Our numbers weren't clear. And they looked at it and they just thought, oh, this, and it didn't go very far at all. So the real difference is the smoother exit. And also stronger, you can get a much stronger valuation because they can't question or push back or try to take out expenses or costs to reduce the valuation. But I definitely know that it makes a massive difference during the negotiation phase. And you want to lead with the value. You want to lead with value. So you really want to be clear what your margins are. If there's any seller's discretionary earnings that you add back in, and it gives much more confidence to the buyer. So basically, most sales go on the last 2 years of data and that growth rate of minimum 30%. But it's pretty much the last 2 years you need in there. Just for due diligence, it's nice to have historical, but at a minimum, you need the last 2 years all up to date, showing the true profit and spend. And they really need it broken out so it's super, super clear what your operating margins are. One thing I really learned is that due diligence can move quick and it can also move slow. The reason things move slow is when numbers aren't clear and they need to get back on calls. We went through 3 different deals until we got an acceptance. The first one, the group just after 60 days they just pulled out. They didn't give reason. They just said it was too complex. Which when I questioned said, "What's complex about this?" It was just a profit. So that one fell over. The second one was probably on me. We didn't get our attorney to go through all the terms and conditions. It was a verbal discussion saying, are the terms the same as this contract? They said yes. When we went to the real fine details, the terms of the second buyer didn't include inventory up front, and that was one of the ones I wanted up front. They wanted to pay out inventory out of sales, so then that one fell over. They were ready to move. But then within 24 hours, we got a third offer, and that's what happens when you got really good numbers. Within 24 hours, reach out to someone and someone said, yep, your numbers are super clean that speak to you. The thing that did slow up times was when people had to ask questions about what does this number mean, what does that number mean. By the time we got to the third deal, I already had answers to any of those questions and it was a much, much faster process. So that was fantastic. It's also important to say during these days is preparation is a key. But also don't cut corners. You see people with tariffs and that, they say, oh, let's use this HS code to reduce our tariffs, increase our profits. You go through due diligence. I know from experience, they'll go through and look at your HS codes, make sure you pay the right tariff. And if you didn't, that will reduce your valuation. Plus, it also lowers the confidence that you're a trustworthy business. So be super transparent, make sure the numbers are right. And that's what Intrepid Advisory is really, really good at. They made it super easy. So we use them for the PTY on the UK business, and it was fantastic. And the thing that I noticed with Jason and Intrepid is they just work with e-commerce sellers, and it makes such a difference. E-commerce sellers is different to bricks and mortar business, especially even on Amazon. You need to work with someone like this who've actually got the right software that connects into Amazon. If you just try to use your Xero or your normal books, it's not going to work. You actually need the software, the API that goes into Amazon. The reason because it pulls out all the fees and extractions. So you're going to sell an e-commerce business, work with an accountant who specifically deals with e-com businesses. Intrepid's great at that. The other thing is once you get your numbers right from the start, you can actually work out a valuation and you can actually go with the number. So just say you're making for $1 million profit, and you're happy to get a multiple of 3 to 4 within that range, you may say, okay, 3.5's the least we're going to take. You know from the start when you start negotiating, if you can't get near 3.5, then the deal's not on. And if you've got really strong numbers, you can back that up. If you're happy with the numbers and they say, oh, this expense should be in there, this one should be, you don't have to negotiate around that stuff. You have clear numbers and you can back it up with reasons for it. And I remember with our ones, we had notes on any of the major expenses to explain what it was. Which is fantastic, and that's what you need at the start. So you're not going in blind. You pretty much got a strong idea what your valuation should be, and you're leading the discussion. You're not coming back with their offer. And I never suggest to be the first one to name the price. You always let the other person name the price. But once they name the price, you know where you sit exactly. Because if they go higher than you're thinking, fantastic. But if it's lower, then you got your number based on your strong financials. If you want an introduction to Jason, he's fantastic. I'll put a link below. No pressure. No sales pitch, just for someone who's been there. Easy to deal with. They go through all the stuff at the front, gives you advice. It was a really good experience. We've worked with US, UK, VAT, Australian, even international tax lawyers we went through experience. And Jason made it super easy to work with, so I highly recommend him. And always talk about businesses that we've worked with and had good experiences. So guys, if you're in that position of looking to exit, or more importantly, if you're thinking about it, because often these things, if you think about an exit now, it's probably going to take at least a year, not necessarily a year, but it's going to take, if your numbers aren't right, you need to speak to someone now to plan for it. And you also want to maximize your growth before the exit. You want to be hitting, because that's something that purchasers love looking for, is high growth businesses. So guys, feel free to reach out to Intrepid. There's a link below to speak to them. Highly recommend it if you're going to do an exit. Exits are where you make 80% of your money in business. So it's a really important goal to look at as part of running a successful business to maximize your earnings on an exit.